Latvia Weekly, your independent guide to the news in Latvia, with your hosts, Otto Talbuns and Joe Horgan. Latvian visiem, and welcome to episode number 88 of the Latvia Weekly podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Horgan, joined next to me by Otto Talbuns, once again drinking decaf coffee in our Jelgava studio. How are you today, Otto?
Oh, hello everyone. Thank you. I'm very well, and I enjoyed the refreshing decaf because it must be the hottest day of the summer today.
So our Latvian word of the day today is audzinātājs, which is a very interesting word. It's a word that students here in Latvia know very well because your audzinātājs is your homeroom teacher, because homeroom teachers here in Latvia have a much bigger significance than they do in America. But audzināt is like to raise, to grow, to help specifically people grow up, and audzinātājs is somebody basically who looks after children. And Otto and I are audzinātāji today because we are looking after my daughter Irisa, my 2-month-old daughter, because my wife and my older daughter are away, which is one of the reasons why today is going to be a shorter episode than usual. We're not going to be going into as many stories as we usually do, or not in quite as much depth, but we have a great episode for you. We have a lot of exciting stories. And we're going to start with something that we've been talking about quite a bit off and on for the last year or so, because there has been this massive buildup to a massive election, a very important election, and this is the Riga City Council election. And normally, Riga City Council election would be happening in the year 2021, but very, very, very long story short, the former mayor of Riga, Nils Ušakovs, left for reasons that we've discussed in many episodes. We will not delve into deeply, but it was not. It was kind of a "you can't fire me, I quit" moment due to a lot of corruption, and or alleged corruption, we have to say. And then there was a circus show after that of trying to create a new government. We had 2 different mayors. Neither of them lasted very long. One very, very shortly. And then there was a election planned earlier this year, but then we had the COVID situation. So now, Otto, when is the election actually scheduled to happen?
Well, I expect to go to the polling booths on August the 29th, which is currently the date in which we may expect this election to take place, and even with or without any changes in the COVID situation, this will probably be the date we will stick with.
Now, what's so interesting about this election is because Nils Ušakovs was the longest serving mayor of Riga basically in the last 100 years, basically in Latvia's entire time as a republic. Including also, mayors under the Soviet regime. He lasted for about 10 years, and that is the longest period of stability there's ever been on, Riga City Council that people can remember. Because, Otto, as you were growing up, how many different mayors of Riga were there?
Well, quite a few. I probably wouldn't even be able to remember all of them. I remember Mr. Teikmanis, Mr. Birks, Mr. Ameriks, Mr. Argalis, then Mr. Aksenoks, Mr. Boyars. So quite a few. So the times of service of the remaining mayors probably is have a closer resemblance to the way how our governments are formed and are faring in the sense of stability.
Because for those of you who are completely new to Latvian politics, we have a lot of parties. Latvian politics are completely fractured, and they're not split into the same kind of ideological camps as in Great Britain or the United States or France even, where you have, the right party, the left party. The parties tend to be a lot more based around certain personalities. You have a lot of people who will go and found a new party, and people will vote for that party because of that person, and a lot of coalition building. And so you don't have that same kind of, stable ideology-based politics as you see in a lot of the countries that many of you come from.
And also you have to remember that in contrast to United States or United Kingdom or other systems that use the Westminster model, we have a parliamentary and proportional system, which means that it is not first past the post, but rather you would always have to have a negotiation and a coalition that you have to build, because it is almost never the case when you would get the majority, so you have to find a compromise, and so that makes all of our governments, either on the national or on the city level, much more less long-term than you would have in these countries.
Now, one of the reasons why there was such long-term stability here in Riga, and we'll get into more of this, we're going to do a specific episode about the election. We've been teasing this for ages, but we're actually going to do it next week. So we're officially announcing in the second half of next week, we're going to do this episode, and we're also going to do it live so that we can take some questions as well on Facebook. We're going to start getting back into that. But one of the reasons why there has been such stability in Riga is in the past, the so-called Russian vote, which you see mentioned in a lot of different news organizations and posts, the so-called Russian vote was splintered between a bunch of different parties. Now, when we're talking about the Russian vote or, Russian voters, this is a very tricky term because this can refer to people who, came here from Russia or also from Belarus, also from Ukraine, also from Kazakhstan, and are, Russian speakers use Russian in their everyday lives, or it can refer to people who, grew up, they might be a native Latvian speaker, but they live more in, this Russian speaking orbit. It's a very, very complicated term. And it's one that gets very, very tricky. We're not going to delve deeply into that right now. But the basic fact is that this so-called Russian vote, whatever exactly it means, it's a very amorphous term, is somewhere just under half currently of Riga's population, something like, between 40% and a half. And this population has been, in the past splintered, but in the last 10 years, it was coalescing around Niels Ushakov's Saskinya party, which was a coalition of a few different parties that came together. And now that Mr. Ushakov's has gone to European Parliament and is not coming back in this election, it looks like the big question is, what is going to happen to Saskinya? Are they going to be able to stay in power? The thing is with Saskinya, they have pretty much mission impossible when it comes to negotiating a coalition. For example, in national politics, although they've been the number one vote-getting party since, the 2010 election, they have never been able to negotiate a coalition with other parties because they had a very controversial cooperation agreement with Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party in the past. They've tried their best to shed that image. They've tried their best to move away from hot-button issues such as Russian as a second official language, from the use of Russian language as a language of instruction in state schools. But they still haven't been able to shake this image. And in Riga city politics, they have had a coalition with this one party called God's Kolport Rigai, but they've worked so closely together that for many years people almost saw them as one and the same, although that ended up not being the case recently. But what's so exciting about this, long story short, is that really nobody knows what's going to happen. And the so-called Latvian parties, in quotation marks, there's always been talks in every single election, that Saskinya has won, that they might be able to come together, make some kind of coalition. Has that happened this time, Otto?
Well, it doesn't seem to be the case in a wholesome manner. At the same time, we can see some sort of coagulation, at least in pairs. You would have the National Alliance, which is running together with the regional union. Then you would have also the Attīstībai par, the Development for party that is running together with the progressives. And, well, they're surely trying to get a firmer position and learning from Saskaņa in trying to form some sort of unity, but they haven't got as far yet.
So we're going to go through each of the parties next week because as of now, there are, it seems like 14 parties that have officially declared, and there's expected to be 3 more that declare in the next couple of days. Is that correct, Otto?
Yes, so we have to wait for all of the applicants to give in the documents and to see whether there are no problems. Are these all correct? Like all the signatures and all the bureaucracy that is associated with the procedure of democracy. And so and already next week we will be able to discuss these applicants for the selection who will be going to run on August the 29th.
But again, we are going to go into a much deeper dive into the election next week when we have a bit more time. But now it's time for Otto to delve into something that he is very interested in. As you guys know, Otto is a big fan of taxes. He just loves paying taxes. He just loves going on about how much he wishes he could pay more taxes. Right, Otto?
Almost right, Joe. Of course, well-designed tax policy is important not only for Latvia, but also for any country which wishes to be more competitive than others. And in our case, as we discussed, the tax reform, which is on the way and hammered out between the partners of coalition, a major issue that has come up and will be hopefully not a massive headache for all of us, is the increase of the basis of the real estate tax. So, which is this calculation based on this, what in Latvian you would call the cadastral value of the property, out of which you calculate the tax you have to pay for, let's say, the apartment or the house you own, as well as the land on which it is situated. And currently, this base value has been frozen for some time, but there has been a previous agreement which will go through that starting from 2022, this basis will be increased, which will mean that for many properties, probably it will include some of those that our listeners are living in, this basis will increase. As a result, some properties will have to have more money paid on them. And specifically, according to the current proposals, the biggest increases could be expected for farmlands, the properties of enterprises, apartments that have been built since 2000, as well as private residences, especially in the central part of Latvia, in and around Riga. And as it will affect many people, and in some of these cases, the expected rise of this basis may be even 2 times, meaning that if you would have to pay the real estate tax of 100 euros, it may go up to 200, or if it was 1,000, it could be 2,000. Then some experts have asked the government to review the tax policy in regard to real estate tax so that it would not hit people very hard, especially in the aftermath of the COVID crisis, so that we wouldn't have people going to streets, maybe not exactly to protest, but perhaps just like to sell their properties and perhaps emigrate to other countries.
And this is all part of the lead up also to the massive tax reform that we've been talking about, which will happen eventually, it looks like. One other minor thing I just want to mention, which is somewhat related to tax reform, kind of indirectly, but in a very important way. So we were talking about the guaranteed minimum income, how that was found to be unconstitutional a few weeks ago. And so it looks like the Ministry of Welfare is saying that it is up for discussion. So that will obviously be a major thing that has to be taken into account with the tax reform that comes up. So
yeah, and also in speaking about minimums, one of the points that the government is discussing also with regard to the real estate tax is also this minimum threshold, which would be exempted from this tax. For example, if you would have your primary residence and if its value is no more than 100,000 euros, then you might be exempted from this tax. So we'll see whether it goes through, because it would also help those who are less well off in this country.
So, going into a little bit of economic news. So, apparently, Latvia's export decrease was among the lowest in the entire EU, which sounds like a very kind of like backhanded thing to be happy about. But considering the economic situation of the world, it's not quite that no news is good news, but I guess something like not so bad news is good news. What do you think, Otto?
Yeah, I think this qualifies some of the headlines that we chose to discuss in the previous show, such as the export of pelmeni, export of other very useful goods and services, which means that our economy has adapted quite well. And I'm happy to see that we have some of these champions that are doing very good even during times like this, when you would have thousands of people out of work, like with a limited amount of money or savings, and which means that we'll probably come out of this crisis better than most of the other EU countries. So all in all, it's very good news.
It's kind of weird how that works. I mean, of course, it's way too early to, say a victory. But, with these different global crises, like, for example, in 2008, Latvia was hit extremely badly, as was Iceland. But there were certain other countries that weren't quite hit so badly. Whereas, in other situations, some countries are hurt worse than others. And so hopefully Latvia is going to be able to make it out of this one without getting quite as damaged as some of the other countries have been. But I do want to mention pelmeni. For those of you who have not tried pelmeni before, it's the kind of Eastern version of a dumpling. So, most of you have tried, if you're from further in the West, when you think of dumplings, you might think of them as some kind of Asian food. But in this region of the world as well, there's a very delicious type of dumpling called pelmeni, and you should definitely try them. They're kind of like, I would say, the official like student food, like when you have to go home, but also, I mean, like for families as well. I mean, when we don't want to cook something, we just boil a bag of pelmeni, and it is really delicious.
Oh, it is very nice. It's a good midnight snack. It is a good quick food which to make, and also it keeps very well in your freezer for a long time. So it is also a good crisis management measure, especially if something happens, either the restrictions like with the COVID. But let's say even if you let's say goodness forbid, like break a limb and cannot go to a store, like if you have a full freezer with pelmeni, then you should be safe and in a well situated position for a long time.
But if there's a big storm coming, I wouldn't get a bunch of pelmeni, because then your freezer might conk out, and then you're stuck with Don't eat uncooked pelmeni. By the way, I learned that the hard way, unfortunately. But anyway, that I could see as a strategic plan for Latvia in the future, becoming the pelmeni capital of the world. But anyway, moving on. A couple more stories. So signatures have begun to be collected against this idea of 4-lane highways throughout the country. So if you remember a couple weeks back ago, we were talking about how there is a plan to build 4-lane highways to all of the kind of major cities on the major ends of Latvia, so out to Daugavpils, out to Ventspils, out to Liepāja. Right now, we only have these 4-lane highways really to Jelgava, most of the way to Jelgava, not all the way to Jelgava, but most of the way to Jelgava, and then also to most of the way to Sigulda. And then just before Sigulda, it kind of splits off into smaller roads, one towards Valmiera Valga, the other one towards Sigulda, and then Pskov eventually.
Yeah, and also Jūrmala.
Yes, of course, yes, to Jūrmala as well. But yeah, I always forget that Jūrmala is like a separate thing from Riga. It used to be called in the past Riga's Jūrmala, kind of to emphasize that. So sorry, Jūrmalnieki. Is that the official word, Jūrmalnieki?
Because if we remember, and if we also currently look at the map of Latvia from 1920s that Joe has on his living room wall, then we can see that already since 1920, Jūrmala or Rigas Jūrmala has been a separate city. So I think we discussed some episodes ago. I'm not sure whether Joe was present there or not, but we remember that the city of Jūrmala celebrated 100 years. Shout out to Jūrmala, and of course probably people there may be very happy that also they have not only a very good railway connection and a bike road, but also a very decent highway, which also is currently in the last stages of being reconstructed.
I would not want to be on that highway today right now. It is unbelievably hot. We're going to get to the weather a little bit later. We haven't mentioned that yet, but yeah, I would not want to be on the highway to Yormala right now. Anyway, so this plan to build major highways throughout the country is being met by some opposition. And so, for example, in America, this is nothing new. We had major highway revolts. You can read about them if you're not familiar with these in the 60s and the 70s, specifically in Boston, which I kind of consider myself from. I lived in Boston for 4 years for university, and I also grew up with Boston, the closest city, even though it was 2 hours away. There was major protests because basically to build these highways going into Boston, they had to tear down entire communities, and once the highway was built, the community would be split completely in half. These different neighborhoods, but for these specific highways, it doesn't seem like that is what people are worried about. It seems like it's more of an ecological concern.
Yeah, in this case, this initiative has been started by a youth organization Protest, which is a movement known for its green and center-left views, and in their opinion, the government should find a greener alternative that would also cost less, rather than like putting hundreds of millions of euros in building of these roads. Certainly, this would help the initiatives that are connected with railway and the public transport development. That would certainly be one voice for this direction. At the same time, I'm not very sure how effective this action will be, especially that we have very many private vehicle owners, and it could also be the case that government may be successful in getting some European money for building these highways. So this argument of spending national budget money will partially fell through. So we'll see how this will develop. But knowing that there probably be more voices in favor of these highways than against. If they will get the money, I would have the inkling that this will go through.
I'm not so sure, actually, because I don't think it has anything to do with this protest. I think I completely agree. I don't think the environment is on the front of most people's minds, unfortunately. But so the plan is to build these before the year 2040. And, we've talked about this many times before, the way that, Latvia's populations, is trending. Although, it's interesting because, the population is decreasing. It's centralizing more in these specific cities that they're being built in. And there are, from what I've read, I'm not sure about this off the top of my head, but I think the amount of cars is still going up on Latvian roads. It's all a question of just whether it'll actually be worth it, what the usership numbers are going to be, and everything like that. And I know the projections currently are that it will be worth it, and it's also about freight and everything. But we do have to see what the numbers are going to be in 10 years from now, because first of all, if they're planning on it's going to be finished by 2040, then, we can expect by 2050, 2060, realistically, because these major infrastructure projects always take forever. And who knows, it might be an easy thing to cut, once cost overruns go through the roof.
Yeah, because I think it will also depend on whether a new conservative party stays in the next government, because that's a priority policy for them, as they are also holding the Ministry of Transport as a political position, and whether they will be able to keep that also in the further budgets. Well, it could be the case that also with regard to demographic changes, the plan could be revisited and perhaps redrafted with priority on those population centers such as Liepāja and Daugavpils, where even after 20 years you would still have a considerable population for it to be economically sustainable. At the same time, it is true, as you mentioned, the point about freight transit, and that could be probably the more important part of this aspect, especially if the electrification of the railway was cancelled, and at least in the east-west direction, the utilization of cargo cars, the lorries, will remain a major way how to deliver goods.
Yeah, I mean, well, two points real quick. I mean, first of all, I would much rather have rail upgrades, especially to Ventspils. And we were joking before the show began that the bogeyman of this podcast is the bus lobby, because we're both much bigger fans of rail transit than bus transit. I'm sure the bus lobby is through the roof about this, because this is going to decrease the ride times. I would be much happier with improved rail infrastructure. But the other point I wanted to make really quick, and I think you'll completely agree with me. I don't think either of us expect Jauna Konservativa Partia to still exist in the year 2040, because Latvian political parties generally have a very short lifespan. We've talked before how none of the parties that existed in their exact configurations in the year 1998 during that election still exist today in these configurations. But I have a hard time imagining that any of these parties are still going to be in the forms that they are. So we'll have to see. Couple other stories real quick. So good news, apparently grain harvest is better than expected in Latgale this year, which it's nice to hear some kind of good news like this, because the weather's been all over the place. I mean, I don't know, I'm definitely not competent enough in anything to do with agriculture or climate or anything like that, but I can't imagine that generally the kind of weather we've had this year is good for just about anything. Just going from extremes of extremely hot to extremely cold to extremely rainy to extremely dry, but apparently it's better than expected. So is this a good thing, Otto?
Well, certainly, if we compare the quality of agricultural land between Latvian regions, then we have to remember that in Zemgale, or right where we are currently at, around Jelgava, the agricultural land is the best, whereas in Latgale, it's relatively the worst, as it is more hilly there. You would have a lot of lakes, and so it's more difficult to deal with that kind of land. So I think it's very good news. I'm very happy for Latgale that they are doing so well, and that certainly also will make our grain industry one of these export industries that keeps our exports up during the time of the crisis. At the same time, it is also connected with some other issues. We know that in other fields, as we discussed some episodes ago, thanks to this very warm weather, you would have berries that are already ready for harvest earlier than usually, and so there is still the trouble for the berry growers that they do not have enough work hands to pick them off. So there is a threat that part of the berry harvest will rot on the fields. So you would have some winners, as in Latgale, but at the same time it's a major issue for the berry growers, and probably one of the reasons why some of the prices even in the central market are so high for berries and mushrooms.
And for people who are fans of skyscrapers and cool building projects just in general, and especially for those of you in Riga, so you have seen before this kind of tall, it's not the tallest in Latvia, certainly, but there's this very tall concrete building. Used to have the Lukoil logo at the top. I don't think it does anymore. I used to think of it as the Lukoil building when I first came here, because that's all I knew it as. Now, generally, there's some kind of very large advertisements on it. There was an Aeroflot advertisement on it for quite some time. This is known to most of Latvia as Presisnams. Otto, what was Presisnams back 30, 40 years ago?
So I think that it was one of the first 5 skyscrapers that we had in Latvia. So the first one was the Academy of Sciences, so the Stalin's wedding cake, but the Presisnams was built later, I think sometime in the 70s, and as you know, under Soviet occupation there was no freedom of press. All of the printing and publishing was centralized. All of the headquarters of all the newspapers at that time were situated in this building, and so was the large printing press. So if you pass that building and you see like this a big first story with big windows, that was where all the hundreds and thousands of copies of all the Soviet newspapers, both the ones that were written locally and the ones that were sent like from Moscow, all of them were printed there so as to keep the monopoly on freedom of speech for the Communist Party. And all of, or many of the journalists at that time also worked in this building. Of course, after we regained our independence, for some time you still had some headquarters of some media there, but it was quickly abandoned because it was not very much adapted for this purpose, especially as in this building ventilation does not work. So imagine on a day like this, you would have the big windows, no ventilation, and also in the winter time it was very cold, as I know. Also, as Olevs told us, it was the case as when he was a journalist some time ago in the 90s. It was also a major issue for everyone who worked there, and it has been staying empty for some time. It was a question whether to tear it down or what to do with it, but it seems that it will stay in place and will be renovated to provide some A-class or world-class office space for rent for anyone who would wish to do so. And I think it's a prime location, and I'm glad to see that it will not go to waste.
And if you look over in that part of Riga, so for those of you, again, who, trying to visualize where the heck are we talking about? So there's these two kind of tall spherical, not spherical buildings, cylindrical buildings. I have to relearn my shape. Those are called Z towers. And then there's also the ship-shaped building called Salokmens, or the Sunstone, or known to most people as the Swedbank building, because there's Swedbank on the top. And then, you have that tall, ugly concrete building right there. Now, just for a little bit of kind of recent history, there was a plan right before the 2008 crisis to kind of build that area called Chipsala. So it's this island called Chipsala. Z towers aren't on the island, they're just off the island. But if you look over from Old Town, it all looks like one kind of big continuous area. There was this plan to build this massive business center with all these big buildings over there. The only ones that actually got built were Salokmens and then Z towers. And then there's these two kind of pretty tall residential towers that built kind of nearby. That was going to be Riga's kind of like business skyline, but obviously that went up in smoke after the 2008 crisis, and Z towers only got finished very recently, and I don't even know if there's anyone still living in there yet. Even now, they've been working on it for more than a decade. But yeah, so they were planning on demolishing Presses Noms at one point, but then that would have damaged the mostly glass tower nearby Salokmens. And now, thankfully, I'm very glad that they're going to be renovating it, because you can look at the pictures on eng.lsm.lv, the English version of Latvian public media. You can type in Presses Noms, or I think it's one of the first stories still, if you're listening to this fairly recently. And some really cool pictures. You can see both a picture of what the planned renovation is going to look like. From what I understand, they're also going to build like a sport field on top of one of the nearby buildings that's kind of connected with it. You can also see pictures of the inside right now, and if you're a fan of urban exploration, it's very, very cool. Wouldn't recommend going there because it's both dangerous and illegal, but you can get your fix by checking out the pictures there. Okay, and just before we get to international stories, most of you have been waiting probably for some kind of update on the COVID situation. And we have good news, because the situation is pretty okay over the last couple of days. So we have the statistics right here. So over the last few days, we had 1 case, then 4 cases, then 1 case again, then 6 cases, which wasn't looking great for a minute, but then we had just 4, then 3, and then today, so this is Monday morning, we had 0 cases yesterday. And a quick reminder to everyone that this isn't just because there's no testing happening, there are thousands of tests a day. So it's just right now, looks like we are not seeing the worst of it. So hopefully this will keep up. But there are still some updates in terms of the measures that have been put into place that we should mention. And first of all, So arrivals into Latvia are being registered in a kind of a national database. And apparently so far, there haven't been major problems with this. There haven't been major complaints. And also there are strict new penalties for breakers of quarantine. So Otto, do you think that this is going to be enough to kind of keep the levels low right now, or do you think that the government is not taking this seriously enough? And also, do you think the general public's taking this seriously enough? Because I've also seen, on Facebook, some people complaining, especially on the expat in Latvia group, that the people aren't really doing their part. People aren't really distancing themselves as much as they should.
Well, I think we can already observe the societal fatigue of the restrictions, and also this carelessness in disregarding the restrictions, even the lighter restrictions that are in place now. I think that government is doing it the right way, probably also something that they should have done in March when these restrictions started, but at the same time there was probably not so much of a concerted action in trying to register the people who are coming in, so that it would be easier to try to see where are the outbreaks coming from and what are the reasons. Also, I understand that this will affect people who have temporary residence permits, and if people who have them will be caught breaking these restrictions, then it could serve as a reason for the temporary permit to be rescinded. So that is probably something that could be of biggest interest to many of our listeners here.
And so we're going to get into some international stories right now. Now, my daughter is starting to get a little bit cranky, so I'm going to walk around with her a little bit, and I'm going to let Otto take this one. So, Otto, tell us, what are some of the international things that we should be paying attention to here in Latvia?
Thank you. So there are three major stories that I wanted to discuss. First, being connected with the European Union. As we covered it already on our previous show, the European Union leaders are discussing a COVID recovery package that would involve hundreds of millions, if not some billions of euros in aid, extraordinary aid to countries to try to get their economies back on track after this half a year or so of disruption. And currently there seems to be an struggle between such countries as the Netherlands, who wanted to be more conservative, meaning that they wanted to have it more streamlined and not to give it, let's say, more than 700 million euros. At the same time, you would have countries such as Italy and Hungary that would be more interested into expanding this recovery package. So we'll see whether they will be able to get a solution to this. If not, we will see either the extension of the current extraordinary summit or another one in a week or so. If we go closer to home, then of course we have to discuss the recent tweets by Russian embassy in Latvia, which insisted that Latvia joined the Soviet Union voluntarily, and of course the reaction of Latvian Foreign Minister Rinkevič, who denounced this based on the facts that are very well known in regard to this. If we would go over some of these facts into explaining why the so-called election of 1940 after the Soviet occupation was not valid, I have to cover just a few, starting from the fact that the election law was changed unconstitutionally by the government, which had no legal standing. Then you had elections that were called at a shorter notice than even the change illegal law said it should have been. Then you also had the Soviet army present in the country and Soviet officials observing the elections at many polling stations, even though the law did not prescribe that at all. Then you also had participation of Soviet citizens who were actually running in the elections. So those were some of the Soviet Latvians who are members of the Communist Party, who, interestingly enough, were made eligible to do so. Also, very importantly, we have to remember that only one list was permitted to run in this election, while others were prevented from doing so, and one attempt to put up another list, the people who tried to do this were arrested and prevented from participating. Also, if you were around at that time, some of our listeners might have had the results were announced already 12 hours before the election was over. So the telegraph agency of the Soviet Union announced the result worldwide already some time before that. It is interesting that another issue that has come up and is still an issue is the question of the Russia Today or RT ban, which Latvia had instituted based on the European Union sanctions law, and a person sanctioned by the European Union being one of the owners or key stakeholders in RT. And it's interesting to see that Reporters Sans Frontières, or the Reporters Without Borders, an international international organization representing many journalists, has opposed this ban, arguing that it is not correct application of the EU sanctions law. So probably it is clear that the perspectives of the Latvian government and European governments and this organization may differ, and certainly the validity of any restrictions of freedom of press are something that we have to be very cautious about. At the same time, it could really be questionable to what extent RT is a valid media which should enjoy the same guarantees that editorially free journalists enjoy in the European Union. If we then go on to the third story that I wanted to discuss is the news that the United States has announced its intention to deploy hundreds of troops in Lithuania during forthcoming exercises in the next couple of years. Which probably goes in context to what we discussed on the previous show about United States taking away some troops from Germany, and perhaps this could be some sort of reassignment of the same troops to other important locations in Europe. So I know that, Joe, you mentioned that you would be skeptical about the US policy interest to have a extensive presence of troops in this part of the world, also taking into account the relationship with Russia and the threat perception and all these matters. At the same time, that at least in a non-permanent way, this is something that the Americans, your government, is going ahead with. What do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, we have exercises, with all kinds of NATO countries, with Canada, the U.S., all kinds of different countries from time to time on a temporary basis. That the question of permanent troops, though, is something I have a hard time. First of all, believing that Russia would accept lying down very easily, and then also just the American public in general is not as clear on why exactly we need American troops in Europe in the first place. Years and years and years after the end of World War II and the Cold War, for that matter.
Yeah, so perhaps this could be a politically good compromise, both for Americans not to take too much attention away from China, which seems to be the number one foreign policy issue in DC, and at the same time to provide the security guarantees in this region without escalating the relationship with Russia. So we'll see how it develops, but certainly from a security perspective, it is good news also for Latvia.
So that just about does it for the international stories. Now, my daughter is getting increasingly cranky, so let's do a quick look at history and then also what you guys can do in the near future.
Certainly. So I think it's a very important date that both Joe and I are very happy to remember. Not that we were alive back then, but that certainly is a major point in history of Latvia and also the history of railway. Because on July 20th, so on this day in 1960, the current Riga Central Railway Station was opened. So instead of the neoclassical building that was there since 1858, this current modernist building was finished, or parts of it were finished in 1960, and since then we have had this building, which I would say, in my opinion, is my favorite modernist building in Riga, in contrast to some other ones that we have discussed in this show before.
I know you're not a big fan of modernism, but I agree. I agree with you completely. We're not going to get into this debate again in this episode, but I just want to mention also about Central Station that as part of the Rail Baltica upgrades that are being made, there is a plan to redesign the station pretty heavily, and you can take a look at that also on the English version of LSM. There's some pretty cool pictures showing what the station's footprint will look like in the future, and it's going to be quite a bit greener than it is right now. For things coming up this week, so one thing I want to mention is shout out to Zane Rader the International Meetup Latvia. So we were there actually at one of the events last year. So if you're interested in meeting some other people, both local people, both international people, their July social event, which is the first one in quite some time because of the COVID situation, is happening this Thursday at 7 p.m. Apparently at a place called Two More Beers, which I have never been to before. I will not be there this week, unfortunately, because I just won't be able to with two kids. But you guys should definitely go check it out. We will make a link on our Facebook page so that you can check it out. So it looks pretty good. I mean, we went together once, Otto, and actually met some of you who listened to the show, and it was pretty fun.
Yeah, it was one of the more fascinating international events in Riga that had happened at that time, and that's a really great opportunity, especially that it is also for free. You do not have to pay for entrance as in some other events like this, and I was very glad to meet people from at least 10 different countries. So this would be a great opportunity for all of you to get in the expat crowd and find other people who might have a similar experience in trying to adapt to our country, which is very interesting. But of course, as with all of you, there could be some challenges, and that could be a great chance to discuss any similar issues that you might have, and also just to have a great time.
And finally, also, if you are interested in checking out Terbersiela, which is as of now reserved for only pedestrians, it's pretty cool. Again, do be careful of social distancing. From what I've heard, people are getting pretty close and bunched up together, and you don't want to be that guy who gave somebody COVID or got it by mistake just because you couldn't stay a little bit further away. So just be careful when you go there. But it looks very, very cool. Have you checked out Terbersiela yet?
Yes, I had the chance to see it myself, and it was very beautiful, both the lamps and the decorations and the potted plants that were put all the way between the beginning of the Tarbata Street by the government building to the Vidzeme market. So I think it's a great way for you to spend some time in central Riga, and I think it makes us more European now. That was my first impression there. But of course, be careful, try to follow the physical distancing requirements, or if it's not possible, which could be the case at the times when you would have more people there, do not forget a mask, and you should be safe with that.
And we have been making recommendations of places you can visit over the summer as a tourist destination. And I'm actually just kind of looking at my map of Latvia now because I completely forgot to do something along the lines. I'm going to recommend a place that I've never been to before. It is it's in my kind of top 3 places that I still want to go to. I just haven't gotten a chance yet. And this is the town of Kuoknese. And I know that Otto has been to Kuoknese before. Otto, what are some of the things that you can do in Kuoknese?
Well, Kuoknese is very notable for the ruins of a castle that was a major stronghold in the middle of the Daugava River on the territory of Latvia, and it gives a very scenic view to the Daugava River, and probably a better way how to spend like this very hot time on some cobblestones in larger cities. Also, on the way to Kuoknese, or not far from that, you can also visit Skriveri, which hosts a botanic garden, and also there is one in Salaspils. So on the way on the Riga-Daugavpils railway line, you can visit Kuoknese, you can visit Skriveri and Salaspils, and enjoy both the ruins of a castle and the scenic view of Daugava, as well as some exotic trees and plants under which to get some shade.
And you could also check out Lichtendars, which is a very amazing monument to Latvia's independence. It's this kind of like little island territory, which was finished just 2 years ago for the 100th anniversary. Some really nice swimming as well, because that area is still part of the catchment area of Jegums Dam as well. So good recreation options as well. Hello from the future. So it is now very early Wednesday morning at just past midnight. We had a few technical difficulties, so the very end of our recording got cut off, unfortunately, and I haven't had time since Monday morning to finish the episodes. Now I'm finally finishing it, but not a whole lot has changed between now and Monday morning. There was one new case of COVID reported yesterday, and no, absolutely, groundbreaking news stories that we have to mention right now. We will be able to mention them next week. But I wanted to close with a redo of the weather forecast that I already recorded before for Kuoknese, in case you decide to go visit. So today, Wednesday, when a lot of you are visiting, it's going to be a high of 17, low of 9. Very high chance of thunderstorms, so do be careful of those. Thursday, it's going to be 18 during the day, 7 at night. Again, pretty high chance of rain, not really thunderstorms, but some rain. Friday, it's going to be 19 during the day, 12 at night. There's going to be some rain throughout the day again. There's going to be rain Saturday as well in Kuoknese, but it's going to be partly sunny with 20 degrees during the day, 10 at night. Sunday, it's going to be the first nice day in some time, 23 during the day, 13 at night. And then on Monday, we get some rain again, 23 during the day, 14 at night. Then Tuesday, 22 during the day, 12 at night, and a very good chance of rain. So anyway, that really does it for this week. One thing I would also like to mention as well, so as Otto and I mentioned earlier, we are doing that episode next week. It's going to be a live episode in the second part of the week, so go to the Latvia Weekly Facebook page and keep an eye out for that. That's going to be about the Riga City Council election. But if you are a member of the Expats in Latvia Facebook page, and you can become a member, pretty easily, we are right now collecting some questions that we are going to ask to the different political parties. And the answers to those questions are going to be posted on the Latvia Weekly website, so www.latviaweekly.com. So we are going, right now, we're in the process of generating some questions from the community. So again, since many of you are eligible voters and you might have some questions that you would like to ask the political parties, this is your chance to do that. So go to the Expats in Latvia Facebook page and find that thread where we are discussing the questions we're going to ask. And then once any of the parties answer, if they do answer, we hope they do, then we will have the answers on the latviaweekly.com page. So thank you guys so much for visiting. Otto wishes his best. He also said Visu Labu to all of you, as do I. Go to the Latvia Weekly Facebook page for stories of the day every single day, and we will see you again in just a short little while. So take care, everyone, and one more time, Visu Labu.